It was a crime that made headlines across the country in 1989. It was all the rage in New York City. The 28-year-old white Wall Street investment banker jogging through Central Park when she was brutally assaulted, raped, left for dead. She was in a coma. 5 black and Latino teenagers were arrested and convicted. They became known as the Central Park Five. They spent between 6 and 13 years in prison until a serial rapist confessed to the crime and they were exonerated. Their story is now the subject of a new documentary.
5 youths were arrested at 96th Street, all between 14 and 15 years of age.
They got him!
You can only imagine the pressure to have this crime solved and solved quickly.
First we was all together, then they started to put us in different rooms separately.
What did you do? Who were you with? Who did you come with?
The tone was very scary. I felt like they might take us to the back of the precinct and kill us.
One of the directors, Sarah Burns, is here along with Raymond Santana, who was one of the Central Park Five. I know, Sarah, you don't mind being associated with Ken Burns.
Not
as
at
the
all.
other director of this, very well-known Ken Burns. This opens in theaters when?
It's open right now.
Okay.
It's playing at the IFC Center in New York and a number of other cities around the country.
Raymond, let's just talk about this for a second. You and the other guys were brought in for questioning, and you guys confessed.
Yes.
How'd that happen? How did you confess? Why did you confess?
It's basically being 14 years old, being naive, not knowing the system, and, a lot of pressure. That's the #1 ingredient, when a 14-year-old kid is put under a tremendous amount of pressure, and it's unknown, and don't know what's going to happen, and when is it going to end. After a while, when you get to the point of breaking down, you'll be able to really much tell the cops whatever they want to hear.
You say pressure, was there torture, like John Burge in Chicago, where you kept awake, not denied food, water?
Yes, all that. No food, no water, no sleep, lack of supervision, parents in and out the room, never really fully there. My grandmother didn't really comprehend what was going on at the time. And so that's just part of the tactics they used on us, besides, the constant yelling in the face and the different officers, lunging at you like they're going to attack you. And so, for a 14-year-old kid, that's very overwhelming, especially when you never dealt with that before.
Sarah, this is the thing you often see play out in movies where it's a horrible crime. Everybody's thinking about it. You have to think back to what New York was back in those days. It was a city, on fire almost.
The murder rate was extremely high.
So they needed to arrest somebody. And even the media that's usually critical of the police, or often critical of the police, weren't in this case. Everybody needed these guys arrested.
Right. I mean, the story was, it made sense to people. And a lot of that had to do with exactly, as you said, what was going on in New York at the time. The crime rates were extremely high. It was about the peak of the murder rate. You're dealing with the crack epidemic.
Right.
And people were afraid. They were afraid walking down the street. They expected to get mugged on a daily basis. I mean, it was just a different city than it is now. And I think that really contributed to people's fear and their desire to have this solved and solved quickly. And there's a lot of pressure on everyone.
Did you get a sense of how soon after the convictions that doubts began to emerge within the system? How early was there a sense that something was wrong?
There were always people who were saying, not many, but there were always a few people sort of saying, wait a second, there are some problems here. These confessions, these statements don't fit the facts. It doesn't quite hold together. But it really was not until the actual perpetrator came forward that anyone seriously reinvestigated this. And if he hadn't come forward, none of us would be here talking about this.
How many years later was that?
That was 13 years later.
But there's one issue here that dealing with this case that we cannot avoid, and that is you had a white female executive, and you had black and Latino boys. This was a modern-day Scottsboro boys, where you had black men, Hispanic men, who were targeted in terms of this role here. Race played a critical role in this story.
Oh, there's no question. I think that, the language that you would see in the press that in covering this case, the animal references, the term wilding came out of this case. They were called a wolf pack. They were called savage beasts. This kind of language that you see in the Scottsboro Boys case coverage, you see it it's the language of lynching. And there's no question that the way that people responded to this case, the way the media covered it, had everything to do with race.
Raymond, you spent, I don't know how many years in jail now. What are you most afraid of?
Not being able to provide for my daughter properly is #1. Also always having that label you know, of being looked at negative. You know, when I come into a room and the person looks at you too long, you say, do they recognize me, you know, as one of the Central Park Five? And if so, is it negative or is it positive?
You know, I told you I'd seen the movie. I watched it on demand. It's a great movie. You root for Raymond throughout the entire movie. He has absolutely the most warm smile. You just want this guy to work out. But what I fear, I think, most, and I bring to this job consistently, is what happened in your story. And that is a mob mentality. A mob decided something was true, which was not true, and no one stood up to go, wait a minute, let's check this from the beginning.
Exactly. People really bought into this story. It made sense to them, right? In this time when people were so afraid, it was really easy to blame that on a particular demographic. And that was, you know, and minority teenage boys were seen as the source of all of these problems. And so it was very easy for people to buy this story that the police gave to the press, and they just ran with it. And even when there are huge problems, I mean, there was DNA testing in those days. They tested the DNA. There was a single sample. It didn't match any of the kids. And they plowed ahead anyway.
I interviewed your dad real quick. NYPD, they're coming after your film for some reason. What's the deal with that?
So there's an ongoing civil suit in this case. Raymond and the others are suing the City of New York and the NYPD for their wrongful convictions. And we've been drawn into that case. The City of New York has subpoenaed our outtakes from the film in hopes of bolstering their case somehow. And we have refused to turn those things over. We believe we're protected by the journalist privilege. And so we filed a motion to quash, and we'll wait for a judge to decide.
Good to have you both here. Thanks very much. It's a great film, Sarah Burns and Raymond Santana. Raymond, continued good luck with your life. Keep that smile. It's unbelievable. You don't look like a guy who has spent a lot of years in jail for something he didn't do. Starting Point will be back in just a moment.